Hi everyone, this is Ruth Brown. I'm here with Gabriel today.
Hey Ruth.
Hey, good to have you here. So we're going to go through our presentation that we gave at NetworkX Americas, our 6G update, really what's been happening probably within the last year. So I'll hand over to you first because you're going to talk a little bit about the timeline and what's going on there.
Yeah, nice one, Ruth. I think, first of all, I love the title, 6G coming into focus. We've been obviously running and being involved in this 6G summit for a few years, but we are at a point now where a lot of the pieces of the puzzle are starting to come together. We don't have the focus yet, but we're kind of getting there. I want to start really the question of why 6G. Now, obviously, 6G is happening, and obviously we're going to bring the hype a little bit. We're doing a podcast and a presentation and so forth. But still, as analysts, we do have to ask, like, what's this all about? And the reason is, I think, the motivation for 6G is going to have such a big impact on the outcome, on what actually the industry ends up developing. So we really need to ask that question. 5G itself is incredibly performant technology. There's not yet an application. We've got gigabits of downlink data rate. We've got a lot there we can do with 5G. We don't have applications we can't serve yet. So why 6G? I think the obvious thing that's changed is we now have all this incredible innovation in AI that's coming through. I think the service domain for wireless, as we're showing on the chart here, just is looking potentially in future extraordinarily rich and really vast as well, with all these different types of applications and services. We won't go through them now. I really like this quote from Qualcomm, this positioning statement in a way that I'll have on the chart. The surface area for wireless is expanding. It's simple, but it's self-evidently true. And, it's great if you cover wireless, for example. It's also, with this AI era, 6G has a chance to, we're kind of reinventing, relooking, reevaluating this network computing idea. So 6G becomes a really important part of the AI fabric, the AI grid, as, for example, I'm using the NVIDIA quote here. So all that together, it's really exciting. Of course, we have also within telco operators, within the ecosystem, particularly with investors, we have those voices saying, hang on a minute, you've got to run this in a sort of capital efficient way. You can't just chuck money at it and so forth. And so there's definitely a voice of being careful and cautious around. That's very important. But if the industry is going to pursue 6G and be effective, it has to do it with some conviction and belief. It also has to kind of have some checkpoints in as we go through, so is the evidence actually matching up to the hype we were expecting and so forth? We know overhype is as dangerous as underhype. So it's a kind of some sort of a balance. So after that, we wanted to look at the timeline. This is a sort of development timeline for 6G. It's taken us through to launch somewhere around 2030. Obviously, right now we're in the study phase. Then we go to normative standards phase, which should complete in early 2029. There's a few things of interest. I think one of the things is in this study phase right now, everyone's got great ideas, and so people are bringing these interesting concepts and ideas to standards and arguing for them. I think we're going to see over this summer with the various meetings and things, quite a lot of ideas being winnowed out, put to the wayside or punted into the long grass for further study and so forth. So that's ongoing. It's a really exciting time. We also have a bunch of other important checkpoints, I think, like WRC 27, but also particularly for the US audience was this LA 28, the Summer Olympic Games there. So that's going to be a really amazing opportunity for the US ecosystem, essentially represented at the summit with ATIS and Next G Alliance, to showcase the best and the potential of next generation connectivity and mobile wireless service. I think if you think about it, in a way it's a chance for them to show how wireless can serve all the other industries there. Talk to customers essentially and set out some sort of vision and demonstrate what they could see. Final point here, second final, I've got two more points. To deliver a 2030 launch or late 29 for initial systems, obviously vendors have to be working on working prototypes, so standard tracking prototypes as we go through. I'd be interested to get your input as well. I thought MWC this year was very good. We saw a lot of demos. And we'll continue to see demos at each stage of the process coming through to Olympic Games. My favorite was the MRSS demo between Ericsson and Apple, because it was a mid-band over-the-air demo. But I think that type of activity is going to be really, really crucial over the next few years. And then my final point here, we're showing the introduction of the timelines for standards development, but really the actions are going to be in the 10 years that follow. We have to remember that as well. This is just prep. It's the deployment and operation and all the services that are going to be the most exciting part of this.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree with you. And getting to that timeline, I think, is as much about kind of getting in the mental headset. We know over the last few decades of generations of different like 2G, 3G, 4G, we've had that 10-year cadence going on. We've spoken, and you mentioned as well, about, cost being efficient in this kind of new generation. I think if we sort of focus a little bit on the mindset, so certainly when we saw the first workshop in South Korea, so we saw these big messages about reduced cost, being lean, being efficient, being simplified. And this was just around the kind of generation and trying to develop the new 6G core, for example. But I guess also on this side of, do we need 6G? There's a lot of opposition around, do we need 6G? You mentioned the LA 2028 Olympics. We had a lot of the operator community actually talking about pushing that out further, 2032 or beyond. A lot of these Olympics, we see the first kind of flagship demos. You mentioned sort of some of the early radio demos from Mobile World Congress. But really, you tend to see at the Olympics some of these application demos, which, we have in the past for sort of 4G, 5G, etc. I guess some of the other things typically to say as well, there's been G fatigue, this 10-year cadence, a lot of opposition. Can we keep it up in the first workshop? But as we've sort of moved forward, I think especially this year, so we had the plenary in Japan in April. So we've seen a slight softening, I think, of the mindset, of the focus. I suppose instead of this no hardware refresh, this kind of very minimal lean architecture, we're seeing this evolve a little bit, and people are actually saying now and recognizing, we are bringing in new radio capabilities. That's going to need some sort of hardware refresh, outside of the general refresh cycle. Also, there's much more AI focus and conversations and options coming into the 6G specification. People are kind of keen to make it much more AI focused. And this, again, is going to need some sort of different hardware. It's not just going to be a lightweight software update, which I think the initial messages were talking about. I guess also as we move into this kind of April mindset with all these ideas coming through, because we're very much at this kind of ideas and capability stage, we're seeing sort of this intelligence becoming much more distributed, and we're seeing this greater engagement, talk about multi-layered AI, talk about AI frameworks, much greater. And I guess that's kind of nice, because we've also moved on from this, do we need 6G, towards, how do we actually build 6G, especially in the first stages. Mm-hmm. I don't know what you're sort of thinking as you sort of move into the aspects.
I definitely think there's been a mindset shift, like you say there, from being kind of cautious and to embracing it. I think that's very real. I think what's going to be still interesting to see is how that then maps into the different deployment and investment cycles. I think the 10-year cycle's fine for specs and development, but it's somewhat decoupled from what actually gets deployed out in the field and in networks and so forth. So I see that being a little bit decoupled.
Yeah, I think also, most generations, you see a lot of new capabilities come into the study documents. We've seen a vast number, especially on AI, coming into, there's a document TR22.870. That's vast, with these new AI native kind of use cases and, requirements or study items coming through.
Yeah, it's insane. It's impossible to keep up with. It's super interesting, but it's it's a massive effort just tracking what's going on.
Yeah.
Right. Let's get into a couple other things. One of the original ideas was that the 6G standard should be lean and streamlined. There shouldn't be many options like there were in 5G, and any exception should be well justified. So that's been like a big theme. A lot of operators, vendors, pretty much the great and the good of the industry, put their name to that that motion when 6G kicked off. And, be interested to get your thoughts on how that's going. I think certainly one area where the 3GPP has kept things pretty simple, that we now have a name for a 6G base station, A node B. Couldn't make it a lot simpler, not to be confused with A node B from the UMTS era, of course. But that then kind of hides a massive amount of complexity in the system, in the RAN architecture, RAN system, and then the wider system architecture itself. So I'm not going to kind of like spend time on the slide, but this is my RAN slide for the presentation here. There's a ton of features, complexities, decisions that need to be made in the next little period. Hopefully your favorite technologies on the side here, but there's just so much going into this. It's fascinating and very, very deep. I mean, there's so much to get into. From here, I wanted to have a quick note on spectrum. Of course, certainly from a US perspective, we have this 800 megahertz of pipeline that's been identified in the bill, beautiful bill or whatever it's called. I'm not going to go into it too much. It's something that people, especially in the US, have very strong opinions on. It's fiercely contested. I was just giving like an outsider perspective to say, I think, the pipeline for 6G spectrum in the US looks pretty good. They have this lower 7, this 4.4 to 4.9, and then this 2.7 bands identified, and they're at various stages. Now, there's definitely, it turned out, one of the things I got from the conference, because we had NTIA there and the National Spectrum Group and a whole bunch of agencies, was, it looks decent, but there's a lot of incumbent users and so forth and so forth. So there's quite a bit of work to do here. Of course, here in Europe, we have the upper 6, and places like India, China, we have different setups as well. But I think the pipeline looks okay, should we say? Whether everyone's going to get the 400 megahertz channel bandwidth seems unlikely, but there's a decent outlook. Clearly, though, the way customers judge mobile networks is, does it work in the moments that matter to them, like for their application or, as consumers and things like that. What that really means then is we're going to have to push 6G down into the coverage layer. So whether that's, I can't believe we're calling mid-band coverage layer, but into 3.5, but particularly into the mid-band FDD layers and even into low band, so that it works and so that we can handle this uplink, this surge in uplink that we kind of anticipate might come from AI and so forth. Now, I think that's really, really important. One way to do this is with this MRSS, multi-rat spectrum sharing. So I have a chart here. I think we've been pretty on this for a while, and it's panning out pretty well. One of the it looks like the lead architecture, if you like, for 6G introduction is to be standalone from day one and to use multi-rat spectrum sharing, MRSS. It's a nice architecture I'm showing here on the chart. It avoids things like non-standalone, so there are fewer options. But basically people are sort of pretty happy with it, and this is the main way forward. So NGMN had put their paper out recently on this as well. Of course, there's a couple of issues with it. First of all is, as of right now, so none of the vendors of the 5G equipment are committing to that they're going to be able to upgrade their current products, or even saying at what point in the future generation product will be upgradable from NR to 6G, 6GR, so from 5G to 6G in software, or whether that's going to have to wait till that age. Fair enough, the standards aren't done, so they're being a bit careful. Now, we've then got a whole load of complexity about what are there going to be different band combinations, different carrier aggregation scenarios, and so forth. So that's certainly something to look at. The other area is that if you don't have MRSS working so well, what happens at the transition point? Do you rely on a very fast handover, layer 2 style handovers to 5G? Or do you need some kind of other migration option? There was a dual connectivity, dual stack, dual registration, those types of things. That's something that's coming in I think that's slated for a September decision. Mm-hmm. Be interested to get your take. My read of it really is that we're going to need some sort of other option. But I don't know, it's up in the air right now.
Yeah, I mean, certainly sort of from day one, some of the original conversations were, we just need one RAN specification, don't we? That was a loud and clear. But I think there is still going to need to be options. I think as well, though, we're optimistic that, all these thoughts around lean the standard specification is still a list of what you can choose. So that's probably going to be part of it as well.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we'll fully get away from that.
Yeah. And I also wonder how much of their existing base operates and are truly be able to sort of move to an MRSS type mode, where there's spectrum sharing it dynamically and things like that. I don't know. I'm just a tiny bit cautious about it. Let's see. So the other thing, 6G standalone from day one, that of course implies 6G core. Now, when I was looking at this, I did a project on this actually last summer, so in 2025. It was a pretty clear view from operator community and from vendors that the 6G core will be some form of upgrade on a 5G core. Yeah, it might have a few new NFs, for control plane and access control and all that sort of stuff, but essentially it was going to be on the similar sort of telco cloud platform with a lot of commonality. Now, I guess one of the things that's coming later with just this kind of explosion of interest in AI native and agentic, I know you've been working on this, that's just blowing up that idea pretty much.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, as you mentioned, the initial thoughts were a few upgrades probably to the original 5G core. I think, especially as we're seeing all these key requirements and use cases coming in, so over 60 since the last plenary in April, that's really changed. So we've got everything from optimizing the core network to sort of supporting this agent-to-agent interaction. We've got the vertical use cases, of course. There's greater requirements and synergy, between RAN and core, so we need to support that. So that is going to change the makeup, really, of the core, whether we like it or not. We need to redesign certain aspects to be more efficient, especially as we introduce AI. So, as we move into this new era, we're starting to hear about these new layers which are likely to come within the 6G core network. So if we have a look at the chart here, so first of all, we've got this new data collection framework. And I think this is similar to what we're seeing already coming into the industry, this much more granular focus about the importance of a data collection framework. So both in terms of, being able to collect and manage the data from these sort of hundreds of agents that we're sort of talking about it, but also being able to feed the data efficiently to different AI models. Of course, there's going to be distribution. We both spoke about that, as we've been sat here chatting. So we need to make sure that we've got compute that's both able to be distributed through this new kind of 6G core, some localized compute, some within probably the core network still. So we can put inferencing in the right place to be, most efficient. The agent layer, I think that is probably kind of quite a new and differentiated function, from 5G. 5G was very much kind of bolt-on AI, and we had kind of aspects of it starting to come in the later releases. But, we're seeing these sort of new agents. And I guess the other thing is once we start introducing the scale of agents everyone's talking about, we need to be able to manage the level of communication, the signaling, for example, security, massively important, and really just enforce a way of working that's going to reduce congestion and actually be efficient. Otherwise, we're just, building up a load of problems, I guess, for the future.
Yeah, this agentic layer was such a huge theme at NetworkX in general, I think, and obviously 6G is as part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we both saw it in the discussions in Dallas. A lot of people are kind of starting to get, I think, excited about this kind of agentic layer, what it can do, the possibilities of it. I mean, it is still early days. I think the enthusiasm is partially all these new use cases and requirements we're seeing come in. Obviously, as we get into probably release 20, not all are going to be, achievable at this stage, but, it's showing great ambition. We spoke about the sort of AI in the RAN as well. There's got to be much tighter synergy really between the both of them. So this is really going to be able to, or we need to be able to support this kind of active sort of communication between the RAN and the core. It's got to be much more agile, I think, as we move into this redesign, or it's much more of a redesign, I'm going to call it that, than the kind of light touch initial thoughts we had where people were, it was almost like a light cloud, AI native.
It's super interesting, isn't it? Because we thought it was going to be a kind of a speed bump upgrade, and now it's turning into potentially a huge architecture shift. I don't know. I don't know which way to jump, really, because I think it's great to be ambitious. I do think there's been this mindset shift, but how actually do you kind of implement this and operationalize it and everything like that is something that, it's not all going to be there in day one in 2030. I just don't see it.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And just from the kind of support and wraparound viewpoint, because, once you start introducing AI, another hot topic we were chatting about at Dallas, obviously tokens, you've got to start be thinking about KPIs. What are the new measurements in your core if you've become very much AI integrated rather than kind of sporadic bolt-ons here and there? We need these new KPIs to not only record and measure things, throughput, latency, jitter, etc. We need to be looking at a different level. How are we optimizing tokens, like time to first tokens, for example? So it is this huge redesign, really.
Yeah, potentially. Hey, I know we come to the end here. I wonder if I don't know if you ever watch. We can ask Pierre. I don't know if you ever watched this or listen to the In Our Time podcast on Radio 4. It's been running for years and years. But at the end, they say, "Oh, that's great, well done. It's got to fit within the radio schedule." At the end, he always says, Melvin Bragg, he's the sort of don of these podcasts. He says, "Hey, what did you wish you'd said that you hadn't?" And they have a little bit extra, and the producer brings them a cup of tea in and things like that. But I'm just thinking, Pierre, maybe what I'd be quite interested as well, Ruth, is to get I'm going to talk a bit about, this is more or less what we presented at Network X, but just reflect a bit on some of the messages you heard from the different talks and the panels you were involved with. I can think of 2 or 3 things that are maybe worth a bit of a discussion.
Yeah, certainly. So back on the AI theme, I feel like that was the kind of bandwagon theme kind of going on throughout the conference. So I think as well as this kind of AI integration, there was a very tight coupling with how do we actually understand it? So this kind of trust seems to be coming through in terms of, not making it some weird or difficult black box scenario, making sure everything is visible. Also, glass box seems to be the new term for it. The other sort of comments that I was hearing quite a lot was around the development of agents, not just within the core network, but I think a lot of the concepts are probably quite similar, was kind of like developing them in much more of a fluid way. So it was kind of like you're much closer to the development rather than, I suppose, in the past, you've said, right, I need a function that does this, off we go, here it is. So much more iterative and kind of fast moving. I know 5G introduced, especially core native functions, and it was upgradable much quicker, but it feels like this is going to be much more rapid. I don't know if you got that.
Yeah, idea. I mean, definitely we talked a lot about this agentic model and agentic operations. I mean, I think, I guess one thing I picked up from it is quite strong support for some sort of agentic layer that would be cross-domain. So it would be RAN and core and maybe transport and maybe some other parts of the actual application domain that you're using. And somehow there's the agentic layer is a way of getting a cross-domain, how to put it this way, operating architecture or operating mode. So there's a lot of talk of that. I think one of the which sounds great. I think one of the big challenges, though, of course, is then everyone's like, well, how do all these agents interoperate? What do you need to standardize? Obviously, you need to stay close to the state of the art in AI with agent to agent, MCP, different APIs. Does there need to be some sort of telecom specific framework or add-on to all of this? So that was a big talking point. I don't think we really got to much of a resolution. No one really wants to standardize that outside of AI. But also they don't want to be doing, they need some kind of interoperability, right? So that came up in a lot of several of the panels. The talk I did with Verizon on the keynote stage, that was his big call to action, actually, is how to make that fast but not too chaotic, because of all the things you mentioned about observability, traceability, and it's deterministic kind of networks essentially. Yes, that was a big point. The other one was AI RAN itself was pretty interesting. All the operators are doing some kind of AI. The debate really is how much you do in the stack, right? In the L1, L2, L3 stack of the base station. It's quite a big lift, and there are definitely areas there where you can do things like link adaptation, channel state, and so forth. Or do you focus more on the SMO, the automation side in the early days? So that was an area where there wasn't really a strong consensus. It was quite an open question, I think.
I think, back to your point about, this horizontal agent layer, I think not only are we getting this new kind of east-west horizontal across the whole telecom layer, we're also kind of getting the north-south too, so it does feel like every angle. The other thing that seems to be much tighter in the conversations that we had in Dallas, and I think we've both been having probably since we came back, is this idea about it's very much, the focus is much more experience driven. So that was in a number of the keynotes coming up, sort of the day one keynote conversation I was having as well. And really integrating the kind of device behavior much tighter with that full end-to-end experience. I know we spoke about it in 5G, network slicing, but this feels like much more of a, AI on the device, understanding and kind of interacting all the way through. So you're actually fully bolting down what the experience is going to be.
Yeah. I've actually just done a paper on what we're calling context-aware 60, where the device and network are interacting autonomously, so without making calls to the call network to set up slices and so forth. That slicing and stuff's good, but it's relatively static, and this is talking about this, like you say, this very dynamic and kind of rapid link adaptation with AIs on both sides of the link could be, looks very promising.
Yeah, it looks really exciting. Like you said, context seems to be the massive word as well. We've got to, and people have been talking about it for several years, but we've just got to add in more context to give us this kind of full view to be able to both manage our data and also, use it and deliver the experience people want. Yeah,
and the big fight there with all the, the vendors, the operators and the device makers is all this issue of data privacy and who's got the customer data and all of that. That's, to me, that's still unresolved to some degree.
Yeah. And probably the last thing, as we were talking of data, is the sheer size of data. So there was a lot of conversations around, we've got, once we start adding context in, it kind of grows the size of data, astronomically. So it's like being more efficient, being more intelligent with the data you're using and processing.
Cool.
So I think that was a good wrap. I'm sure there's probably topics, we still should have discussed, but...
Hey, there's a bundle of stuff we could talk about. But anyone watching, just get in touch with us. We're really easy to find on the internet. Email us or LinkedIn or whatever.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. Until the next time.